This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 639, entitled Masculists Don't Tolerate Feminist Monoconsciousness. Description. This flyer expresses the level of hatred that biconscious masculists feel towards the deeply hypocritical and bigoted attitudes of monoconscious feminists towards men. Biconscious masculists expect women and feminists to be biconscious. Otherwise, these women are severely punished by not getting a man, being effectively exterminated, forced to rot on the shelf, manless and miserable. The flyer itself. Masculists don't tolerate feminist monoconsciousness, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Typically, when a biconscious masculist is confronted with a monoconscious feminist, sparks fly. The biconscious masculist, by definition, has had both his feminist and masculist consciousnesses raised. That is, he knows how men oppress women and how women oppress men, because he is familiar with both feminist and masculist arguments. He knows that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in fact women's oppression of men is far worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, which makes them far more serious than the relatively mild ways that men oppress women. To a masculist, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen by him as rather small beer in comparison with women's horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men. For example, women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, and other horrible gender crimes against men. A monoconscious feminist, by definition, has only had her feminist consciousness raised by being indoctrinated all her life that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. Feminism is a deeply misandrist, gynocentric ideology that causes women to hate men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, domestic violence, sexual harassment, etc. Masculists don't deny that men oppress women. Masculists are mostly biconscious, since they too have read feminist books and have learned how men oppress women. The essential difference between biconscious masculists and monoconscious feminists is that masculists are aware how women oppress men, and feminists aren't, because by definition, feminism is monoconscious. As a result of this difference, we have a total failure in the meeting of minds when it comes to a confrontation between a monoconscious feminist and a biconscious masculist. A biconscious masculist will have a hatred of women who commit horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, and will aim to wipe them out by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them. When a biconscious masculist comes across a monoconscious feminist, he will be like a bull seeing a red flag. To a biconscious masculist, a monoconscious feminist is a red flag. He will see her as an utter hypocrite. The feminist, however, who is bitching in public how men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc., feels, as a feminist, that she has every right to feel hateful towards men for committing these horrible gender crimes against women. So she expresses that hatred publicly. She feels she occupies the moral high ground, so has no compunction against behaving as a feminazi cunt towards men. To a biconscious masculist, this monoconscious bigotry of the feminist is contemptible, so it's likely that he will lash out at her, calling her a, quote, monoconscious, misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi cunt. He will scream to her to, quote, learn some masculism, you monoconscious feminazi bitch. Learn how women oppress men far worse, you sexist, hypocritical, bigoted shit. Women like you are so hated by biconscious masculists that we effectively exterminate you. Masculist and MGTOW ideas are now spreading so fast across the planet that there are already millions of us. And in less than a decade, it's likely that nearly all the men you come across will have been infected by the masculist virus, and they will not tolerate your monoconsciousness, you sexist, bigoted, hypocrite, lashing out at men for the rather mild ways that men oppress women. When you women oppress men far worse with your hated man-slavery, your divorce rape, your forced fathering and the like. End quote. Masculists have a hatred of gender criminal women who commit these horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, and punish these gender criminal women by effectively exterminating them, by forcing them to rot on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths, by being totally ignored by masculisted men. Masculists are abolitionists who see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. Masculists have a very powerful moral argument that they force on women, and that is that it was men who gave women science-based medicine, the pill, household gadgets, higher education, etc., so that women today have a life expectancy of 85 years and hence a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral duty to FIP up by bothering to get a career competent education at high school and college so that they can be FIPs as adults and not become fluffy crappers who study fluffy crap majors at high school and college so that they become fluffies as adults, then manslave and divorce rape millions of men. Masculists are abolitionists, so have a hatred of fluffy manslavers and aim to see them wiped out, rotting on the shelf as hated vermin. Masculists predict that a decade from now, as masculine and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet in huge numbers, that several million young women will have suicided over the issue of not fipping up, who will have been viciously and hatefully rejected by their male classmates who will scream at them for being manslaving, divorce-raping vermin, who are so hated that these young masculisted men will want to see such women die out, wiped off the face of the earth. Masculists see monoconscious feminists as profound hypocrites who often have the attitude that it's okay for women, for feminists, to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women. But it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for the ways that women oppress men. During the few years that it will take for women, millions of women, to become familiar with masculist and MGTOW ideas, it is inevitable that there will be millions of verbally bitter, hateful confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists. When a monoconscious feminist makes some misandrous statement in public to a mixed audience, then the biconscious masculist in her presence will see the red flags and will attack her viciously with hateful masculist rhetoric as shown above. To the monoconscious feminist, this verbally vicious, hateful masculist attack on her will only reinforce her opinion of men being the enemy, being misogynist, to be hated. To the masculist attacking her, she is an arch-hypocrite who is ignorant of how women oppress men, and far worse, so these men will not see her as a contemptible sexist, hypocritical bigot, an MFB, monoconscious feminazi bigot, and will only harangue her all the more viciously, scaring the shit out of her. Since a very angry man, with his 20 times higher testosterone levels in his blood, can be terrifying to a woman who is so much weaker physically than a man, a very angry, hateful man. Thus, there will be no meeting of minds between these two groups of monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists until millions of women become familiar with Masculist and MGTOW ideas, but that will take time, probably up to a decade. Now that over 60% of young men under 30 in the US refuse to even date women, in brackets, let alone not marrying nor giving women their sperm, millions of women will go through a lot of pain, and lots of media articles will appear explaining why young men refuse to date women, that explain to women Masculist and MGTOW ideas, so that eventually the majority of women will understand why biconscious Masculists are so hateful of fluffies and fluffy feminists, seeing the first as manslaving, divorce-raping vermin, and the second also as hypocrites and genociders, since fluffy feminists have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for men that the large majority of young men now refuse to marry and have kids, thus crashing the birth rate. But they are simply reacting to the toxicity of divorce created by the hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. This makes these divorce court feminists indirect genociders who have to be stopped. The better informed a man is of Masculist and MGTOW ideas, the greater the level of hatred he feels for the horrible gender crimes that women commit against men. So the greater the level of hatred he projects to monoconscious feminists who remain ignorant of Masculist and MGTOW ideas. As the level of Masculist hatred and awareness grows, when he eventually does come across a monoconscious feminist, that feminist is going to be blasted out of the room with a really vicious, hateful, masculist diatribe. It will deeply shock her. Millions of such bitter, hateful confrontations will take place in the coming few years, until the majority of feminists become biconscious by learning Masculist ideas and losing their monoconscious feminazi bigotry. Men are fed up with the level of misandry of MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots. So once they have intellectually armed themselves with Masculist ideas and rhetoric, they will not only be able to answer back to these monoconscious misandrists, they'll be able to crush them viciously, hatefully, and blasting them out of the room in verbally explosive rage at the sheer hypocrisy and ignorance of the MFBs they are confronting. Masculists expect feminists and women in general to be biconscious, otherwise these women will pay a very heavy price of not getting a man. As Masculist ideas spread to most men, monoconscious feminists will then be facing the reality that nearly every man they come across will have been masculisted, who will not tolerate her monoconscious ignorance, her hypocritical bigotry, and will bite her fucking head off. If the monoconscious feminist sees a man as a potential boyfriend, then she is going to be brutally wounded by his hateful, vicious rejection of her if he is a biconscious masculist who does not tolerate feminist monoconsciousness and dumps any woman on the spot who is like that. As the majority of men become biconscious, as is likely over the next few years to a decade, that women, monoconscious feminists, will be forced to become biconscious, to fip up, or they will be literally spat at, rejected by men, biconscious masculisted men, who will have no tolerance for feminist monoconsciousness and will wipe it out by wiping out monoconscious feminists, expecting them to educate themselves into biconsciousness, or they will be rotting on the shelf, dying slow, miserable deaths, rejected not only by men, but by masculisted women, who will also spit at them for making men so hateful of women, thus making the finding of a supportive man so much more difficult for biconscious women. The coming decade will be verbally bloody between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, as masculists force women into biconsciousness or to rot on the shelf. The gender war that is coming will go down in the history books as the biggest war in the history of humanity, since it will involve several billion people. The rise of masculist biconsciousness will change the lives of billions of people. It will change men's lives and men's attitudes and expectations towards women. It will also change women's lives, since if women don't become biconscious, they will die out, viciously and hatefully rejected by men. Masculisted men. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 630 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey and MGTOW.tv. Ciao.